I've been using LiPO batteries for the last 10 years. My other hobby is radio control aircraft. And because of these batteries provide super amount of power and are significantly lighter, they've helped the industry as far as anything doing with radio controlled items, whether it be cars, aircraft, whatnot. There have been significantly improvements.
So George, I shouldn't use my NiCads anymore?
Well, you can, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, as I said, most of you all have seen the little lithium polymer ones that are in your phone. You've seen the coin cells. We've all are accustomed to the lead acid batteries. Then we have, and I'm going to jump down to the nickel cadmium and nickel metal hydride batteries, and I'll talk a little bit about the problems with these. The button cells are basically just for specific purposes, usually for your watches and so forth. And then alkaline batteries, which are the replacements basically for the original old copper zinc. And the alkaline that was developed by the Japanese, what it did was, if you remembered that for storage purposes, if you left alone a copper zinc, it would slowly just emulsify itself, and the alkaline stopped that and gave battery storage for these types of batteries up to 5 years before they started breaking down. So that was why it's not really a change in chemistry, it was an additive to keep it from breaking down. As I said, most of the batteries are lead acid, and we're normally standard. We've gotten used to 1.5, we've gotten to 6, 9, 12, 24, and 48 volt batteries. With the coming of the newer types, all of a sudden we found out that the world has got a whole different set of voltage to deal with. As I said, carbon zinc batteries, the problem is they're single use, throw away, and for their size, they were quite heavy. Lead acid, you had plenty of power, but you had a size and weight problem, and you had the fear of acid burns and a whole batch of disposal. We talked about the button coin. They're just basically very minute special requirements. The nickel cadmium was the first of your rechargeable batteries, and it came along and it had basically the ability to be recharged about 500 times in its life cycle. It had a decent storage. The problem with it was that it came out to be 1.25 volts rather than 1.5 volts. Now, industry said we had plenty of room enough to play around with a half a volt, so we're not going to worry about it. But it had one horrible, horrible problem. It had a memory problem. And if you've never dealt with a battery that had a memory problem, I'll explain. If you had a nickel cadmium battery that had a 500 amp discharge capacity, and you used it for 3 or 4 times, and you only used 250 amps of the 500 amps that it was capable, it had a new memory. It now became a 250 amp battery, and it wouldn't go any higher. And you had to go through a whole batch of games to rapidly discharge it and force it out of memory to bring it back up. So the next set of batteries were nickel metal hydride. Again, limited 5 to 1,000 times recharge, but they didn't have a memory problem. Then came your lithium iron phosphate and lithium polymer types of batteries, which is a little bit I'm going to talk about more about today. The ones I'm displaying are the small ones with high power that go into any of your cars, any of your RC planes, and so forth. For storage and home, they came up with some huge ones. Mike was kind enough to show us one here, and they have one, like my daughter has one, that can take care of her refrigerator, one set of lights in the house, and so forth. And it's about half the size of this table, but it can do it for 24 hours. So they're out available but it's amazing how much power they can provide. Okay, the lithium technology was actually developed in the late 1970s, 80s, and the first lithium battery was developed by Oxford University, and it used an exchange of lithium ions to generate the current, and it was in a liquid electrolyte. So it became a problem of how to store, how to use it, how to make it mobile. The first commercial lithium ion battery was produced by Sony, and it was for their camcorders, if you all remember. And that came out in 1999. Ericsson first commercialized it. So these types of batteries have been out there since 1999. As I told you, they are a great set of batteries. There are two basic types, lithium polymer ion and lithium phosphate and lithium ion types of batteries. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between them and why one is better than the other and some of the shortcomings of both. Okay, how do they work? Because then I've got some here, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this around to let you see one. And if you can feel, there are a whole batch of cells there. Each lithium type of battery is a series of cells, just like you have with a 12-volt battery. You have plates. Well, in this case, you have folded packets. And the packets are designed that the center of the packet has a separator, and you've got an anode and a cathode side. And the current flows one way or the other. So, and then what they do is that they put these together in series or parallel, depending on what the need is, to get your voltage. The issue here now is that these batteries develop 3.7 volts. And that's an average number. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why there are problems with this 3.7 volt issue. But you're now dealing with a battery that produces 3.7 volts, and it has some fantastic abilities to discharge and charge. So basically, a LiPo battery, as I said, has a range of from 3.1 to 4.2 volts, with the mean being 3.7. Now, for anybody that has an electric car, here's the issue that you have to be careful with the 3.1 volts. If that battery gets discharged down to 3.1 volts, it won't charge again. You're sunk. And so many of the rental places have issued cars out, and there's a warning that says you're coming to the end, stop, and they go beyond it. And all of a sudden, you can't charge that car up. You're stuck. Now, the manufacturers and a lot of the car dealerships do have a different type of way of recharging these batteries back up. But that is the problem. Your home device that you have at home to charge those cars can't do it. And there are a lot of complaints about that. Now, the interesting thing about LiPo batteries is that they have the ability to rapidly discharge. And we'll go ahead and get into it. But the one I'm being passed around is a 4-cell. And so that is 4 times 3.7 to get you the voltage. So you're talking about 4.2 volts. Oh, excuse me, 14.2 volts in that. And that is a 5-amp battery. So don't go putting it between your tongue to go see if it's got any current, because it's going to light you up. The interesting thing about LiPos is that they have this ability to be able to discharge tremendously. Now I'm talking about LiPos, both the phosphate and the iron. More so with the phosphate. I have some batteries that are rated at 5 amps, but 50 Cs, and we'll talk about Cs. So that means that this battery normally can produce 14.2 volts for 5 amps for 1 hour. But if I wanted it to produce 250 amps, I could ask it, and it would last for 1 minute, but it would not explode. It would just send that current out. That's what is so marvelous about these batteries, because now you have a unit that can have a variable discharge rate when you need it. Like for airplanes, if we want to go vertical, all of a sudden we can go ahead and ask for that battery to jump from 5 amps to 25 amps so that we can go up 1,000 feet straight up, and that engine can take it. For automobiles, you can be driving along and all of a sudden you have to goose it. It'll give you the amps. If you're back in first gear and you've got to tow something and you need those amps, it'll give it to you. And that's what's so great about these batteries. They're, for their size, their weight, they are extremely small. Now, going back to their, the way the battery is built, it's a really funny configuration. As I said, they all have cells, and we're all used to just packing in the batteries together in series, and we have one wire at the end for the anode and 1 hour at the end for the cathode, and we've got current going. That's fine for the first cell. But as you go ahead and attach different cells, you notice we've got a wiring problem. Each cell has to be individually charged, not combined. So you've got a whole batch of other connectors sitting out here that are used to individually charge each cell. And that's what confuses everybody. And when they first came out, you had a charger that had a funny contraption like this that said, oh, I'm dealing with a 6 cell, I'm dealing with a 4 cell, I'm dealing with individual cells. They finally got smart enough to put all of that inside the housing like this one so that you can charge directly here. But if you took a look at the charging wiring schematic, you'd find that you were going to each individual cell. And again, there's even some wilder combinations when they go ahead and put parallels in there to up the capacity, connecting to different types of instruments, radios, and so forth. We had Dean's connectors, we had X60s, and we have EC3s. These will handle up to 90 amps, and that's it. Now, if you'll see in a car connector, all of a sudden you have a funny looking plug, and that's because there's one heck of a lot of amperage going in to recharge those batteries, and it's got to be able to flow one way or the other. So when I go ahead and discharge a plane, like taking it up, that battery is sometimes so hot that I can't touch it. It's not damaged or not, but there is so much amperage discharge that's why these connectors are designed, actually, as the hotter they get, they expand to make a stronger connection. I went back and talked to you a little bit about how the batteries were built. Originally, you had pigtail. Who has the battery? All right. This is the pigtail that tells me, okay, I've got a 4 cell, and I'd have to match it up with the one that says 4S. Again, they made it a whole lot easier today, but for those of us that are flying planes and rockets and so forth, we don't want the additional weight of a housing and so forth, so we stick with these. You need to understand the battery itself when you get it, and it doesn't matter whether it's packaged here or individually like this. Every one of them will tell you the cell count. Everyone will tell you the capacity. It'll tell you the voltage. It will tell you the discharge rate and the power and balance connector. In this case, I told you, remember that I had basically a 7.4 battery, which is 2 S's, there's 2 little packets. It has a 50C discharge rate for 5 amps. So if I wanted to pull 250 amps out of that, I could. It would last for all of 1 minute, but it wouldn't explode. It would give me what I needed. And so that's why you have to understand this. The C rating also is another thing. Because of competition and so forth, and the need to recharge, if you have a 50C discharge rate, you also have a 50C charge rate. So if I was in a contest running a car back and forth, and I needed to change a battery, I could dump this thing onto a charger, put 250 amps into this thing, and be charged in 1 minute. Now, you could do it once or twice, and you've basically cooked your battery, but it's capable of doing it.
That's going to be a hot potato.
Yes.
10 minutes later, you can hold it.
Yeah. But that's what's so neat about these batteries. Okay, we talked about chargers a little bit and so forth. Originally and so forth, they came out with USB chargers, single-use chargers, multiple-use chargers, and as I said, for cars, depending on where you go up, you'll see some adaptation to a standard plug-in type to the charge rate for your car. They all do the same thing. As I said, if you go back inside the housing, all of those cells. Now for cars, it's really interesting. They have packets rather than batteries, because there are multiple batteries in each packet. And I think you were the one that had yours replaced, or a series of them in one of your cars.
The battery
Yeah.
replaced, but it wasn't LiPo.
Well,
It was
nickel.
metal hydride.
Not, okay. The manufacturers, I looked up, are using all 3, depending on their need. The older versions were nickel metal hydride, because they're not a memory problem. And the newer ones are using either LiPo or LiFe, types of batteries. Usually in your sports car and so forth, where they really want to be able to draw the amps and get that thing flying, you're going to find it in the LiPo version. For the regular sedans and so forth, you're going to find it in the LiFe.
Mine's a hybrid.
So
It's not the primary traction, although it is when the car starts. And it's very interesting. A nickel metal hydride battery can last more or less forever if you never let it get below 20% capacity or never let it get over 80% capacity. And so I have a charge level indicator all the time. And the car will dump power into a bunch of heat sinks if it thinks that it's going to go over 80% to protect the batteries.
You know, the other interesting thing about life batteries or LiPo batteries is that basically they have better than a 5-year storage. They lose 1% of their voltage a year. So you can put one away and leave it there for a couple of years, and you've only lost 2%. And it goes. And basically, the only issue you have, like every other battery, and the automobile industry has kind of hides it, cold weather causes problems. Okay, they don't like cold weather, and therefore they don't give you the capability when it's super cold
Or super high.
or super hot.
George, if you want to see somebody really enjoy a battery discharge, just go out with Dave Lane and have a test drive.
I knew you were going to bring it up. I loved your face when you nailed that thing.
Oh my gosh, that thing is fun.
Okay, but the interesting thing about electric motor, and we'll just sidetrack here, is when we talk about a piston or a combustible engine, it has to rev up. An electric motor does not have to rev up. When you pour the voltage to it, it's there and it's ready to go. And that's why Electric cars can go faster and so forth. Okay, we talked a little bit about amp hour and C rating, and I didn't bring one. One of the interesting things that shows you a deterioration of a battery is it starts to puff. And it's an interesting chemical issue of a puffy battery. What would you think is causing the battery to puff up?
Gas?
Yes, but what type of gas?
Oh, hydrogen.
No,
Oh,
it's pure oxygen. It's a chemical breakdown, and it releases oxygen. And this is why all of a sudden everybody is scared of these when they go, because there is stored oxygen all in a puffy battery. And I got some demonstrations of what happens. Okay, all sorts of problems with these connectors and so forth. Not so much when you buy one that's already intact like this in a case. But for those of us that are handling this, we got to make sure that, one, we don't damage the balance connector, and two, we don't damage the plugs to produce power. All US manufactured and UL approved chargers will not let you charge a battery if either case is bad. Now, this is a smart charger. It can charge from lead acid to all different types. I can fake it out by saying, oh, this is a lead acid battery, and connect one of these things up. And I'll talk to you a little bit later about what happens when you don't pay attention to what you're doing with it. So, as I said, the issue here is a bad cell reading 3.1 or less. All of a sudden, two things happen. The battery itself has some interesting situations. It will always try to give you the voltage that you want. So the bad cell goes to 3.1, the good cell goes to 4.7, 8. You know, whatever voltage it's going to have, it's going to try to give it to you. They don't know why this happens, but it can create some interesting problems. So, and we'll talk about what happens with it. If you all remember a couple of years ago when the hoverboard and a whole batch of LiPo battery assisted toys came out, and we had fires everywhere. We had also an issue with one of the initial HP laptops that decided to use LiPo and did not build the proper recharging capacity on it. When you have a charger for LiPo or LiFe and it tells you 2 hours charging time, that's it. Don't go over it, and I'll explain later, but pull it plug. Trouble is, here in the United States, they have a sensor built in and it shuts itself down. The Chinese and some of the cheapy ones don't. They expect a person to be vigilant, and after 2 hours, go unplug it. And there's a problem with overcharging. As I said, the normal rate for us when we figure it out is we talk about 4.1 volts for usage. So all the planes and so forth and engines and so forth, we do that. For using life batteries, they go ahead and calculate what they need capacity-wise and what they need within the discharge rate. So the manufacturers of cars says, okay, this engine at the most will demand, and I'm going to go way low, but I just say 3,000 amps worth of power. And they cap it at that. Not that the battery can't deliver more, but that's what they cap it at. So that you don't run into problems of, like you're talking about, going above 80 or below 20%. I told you that the battery puffs up is storing oxygen. One of these, when it explodes, produces 700 degrees. Okay? This is why the airlines will not allow you to take these on board, and why they have to be shipped across the United States on trucks. If you ever, we want to exchange batteries, you'll notice that there's a funny looking white sticker on all the vehicles that says this has a LiPO battery in it. And for going overseas, they've got a whole batch of special arrangements that can't be stacked on top of each other and over to save the possibility of it exploding. So we did some fun. Here is what happens when a single 4-cell battery gets overcharged. Let's see if this will work. I lost the, there we go. All of us are required at our field always to have individual fire extinguishers. So how do you store these, and how do you protect your house and so forth? Well, a good old ammo box is the perfect thing. And the next film is playing. All right. There we go. There goes number one. There goes. So these sit at home in my closet on cinder blocks so that I know they're protected.
So the fire that was happening in the other video is being contained in the can.
Yeah, there's no, the seal will burn inside this, but it will keep all the flash going. And so that's why you have to, Mike's is built the same way so that it's contained. Okay, LiPO, as I told you, is a more stable battery, and that's why for car manufacturers and so forth and everything, they're going with it. It is not quite as versatile, but again, it has all the power ranges that you need, it's less dangerous, and so forth. Those of us in certain industries, hobbies and so forth, where we are worried about weight and we don't want extra housing and so forth, we're sticking with these. But that's the difference between them.